Minister, Rajasthan Tourism, Ministry of External Affairs, SAC Division, ICCR, Public Diplomacy, Dainik Bhaskar Group, DNA, The Glenlivet, Hindustan Times, The Hindu, Google, NewsX, Penguin, British Council, Sula, Foundation Jan Michalewski, JCB. Our grateful thanks to Royal Treasure for the beautiful furniture they have provided for all our stages and the spectacular music drop. Ladies and gentlemen, a couple of announcements before we proceed. There is a debate at 5:15 this evening in the front lawns. The topic of the debate is "This House Believes Man has replaced God." The speakers are Richard Dawkins, Javed Akhtar, Suhail Seth, Mark Tully, Swami Agnivesh and Kezra Shehraz. There are a couple of announcements, further changes in our sessions. Our next session, the shipping news with Annie Prue and Nilanjana Roy, has been cancelled. At 12:30 at Mughal Tent, the Lionel Shriver session, it's Lionel Shriver in conversation with Nilanjana Roy. And lastly, I had already announced it earlier, Reconstructing Rumi, which was scheduled for 3:45, the front lawns, has now been scheduled to be at 10 o'clock. May I request you all to please switch your mobiles on silent mode. There will be a chance to ask questions at the end of the session, so please keep your questions brief so that everybody gets a chance. Thank you very much. Over to you, Manoj.
Thank you. I'd like to thank the Jaipur Weekly Festival for having us here. And I must say I'm pleasantly surprised by the number of people who have indeed shown up out here. Because this is a very new subject. And as you will see from the discussion, that it's a subject which is in desperate need for some kind of intervention, we need some kind of effort, because this is as our panelists will tell you, that we are virtually military history is something which is a bit of an oxymoron in this country. If you go to the bookshop out there, you won't find many books of military history around there. You go to bookshops anywhere in India. Whereas if you go to bookshops in any major country in the world, you will find not entire sections devoted to military history. So that's why I'm pleasantly surprised, and I hope we can kick off something here. The big problem, of course, is that though we have in the last 10 years started creating certain think tanks and military institutions, but we have still not caught up with the idea of where the oxygen that they need, that is original sources, records, etc. Now I have a panel here, and I have Major General V.K. Singh, who retired from the Indian Army in 2002. He's a military historian. He's written a number of books on the Corps of Signals, leadership issues. He has contributed to the armed forces movement in India and the history of the Corps of Signals. I have Ambassador Chandrashekhar Dasgupta. He's a former Foreign Service officer and an ambassador to China and the European Union. His interests include diplomatic and military history with a focus on political factors in the higher direction of war. I must tell you that one of my favorite books is his War and Diplomacy in Kashmir in 1947-48. And if you read that book, you really realize the value of archival research. Unfortunately, he had to do most of his archival research in the UK for that book. And it's through that research he showed how the British really skewed the whole Kashmir dispute in the United Nations against us. So the many twists and turns of the Kashmir dispute he was able to show, but he had to depend on UK archives. That's a bit of an irony. Then we have Squadron Leader Rana T.S. Chhina. He has been a former helicopter pilot. He was a recipient of a prestigious McGregor Medal for military reconnaissance in 1986. He had the distinction of carrying out the highest landing in the world by a medium lift class helicopter. He's a very keen military historian, and he's currently the Secretary and Editor of the United Services Institution of India, Center for Armed Forces Historical Research, and the Vice President of the Indian Military Historical Society in the UK. He's the author of a number of books, the latest of which, Indian Order of Merit, Historical Record, 1837-1947, is a study of the oldest gallantry award in the Commonwealth. And then we have our youngest panelist, Anit Mukherjee, the former army officer. He's writing on books on civil and military relations in India. He has published in New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Rusi Journal, and amongst others. He's currently working at the Institute for Defense Studies and Analysis. And what I'm going to do is that I'm going to kick off the discussion by a very simple question to Ambassador Dasgupta. Why military history? Meaning, how does it help us? Meaning, what is the value of military history?
Well, that's a very important question, Manoj. And I think the answer is that we need to study military history for the same reason that we need to study history in general, which is to say, to try and avoid mistakes that we've made in the past, to improve the level of preference. History, of course, never quite repeats itself, but by studying what has happened in the past, we can draw some broad conclusions which do provide a useful guide for future action. Now, what is military history? Military history is not merely the history of battles or campaigns. It is also the history of the higher direction of war, the way in which the overall national political objectives of the state shaped and determined the nature of actual military operations. And let me make a few remarks on that and the importance of studying this aspect. The other aspects, my fellow panelists are in a much better position to speak with authority than I, since they've all actually served in the armed services, unlike me. Now, it seems to me that the study of the higher direction of war is particularly important in the case of middle and small states in some ways. And let me explain why. Middle and small states are frequently dependent on big powers, on major powers, for economic support, for military support, and for diplomatic support. For this reason, the course and outcome of wars between middle states are frequently decided not simply by the military balance between the combatants or the skills with which they use their military resources, but by the influence which big powers are able to exercise on the actual combatants. And the intensity, duration, and in some ways the outcome of these conflicts is often shaped by big power intervention. And I believe this is the case if you look at the wars that we fought with Pakistan, at the Arab-Israeli wars, the war between Iran and Iraq, and so on. And if you take the wars that we fought, in my book I tried to take the case of the first Indo-Pakistan war, which was a war marked by a unique degree of dependence of both combatants on a third big power, namely Britain. Not only were India and Pakistan totally dependent on Britain for military supplies and POL, but the three armed forces on each side were all commanded by generals from Britain. And in the case of India, the defense subcommittee was headed by Mountbatten, the Governor General, rather than the Prime Minister.
We were essentially commanded by British generals on both sides.
On both sides. So it was a unique case. But by 1965, we were in a better position, not that extreme sort of dependence, but nevertheless, we were dependent on both superpowers for economic support and also for support generally in the context of our strained relations with China. 71, much better position. It's not usually recognized in this country, but the Green Revolution made a dramatic change in the overall strategic picture. Just imagine what would have happened if the Bangladesh Liberation War had broken out 2 or 3 years earlier, in 68 or 69, when we were leading a ship-to-mouth existence. The specter of famine was staved off only by US food PL 480 supplies. What would have been the strategic choices before an Indian government had the war broke out a little earlier? So we were in a better position, but we still needed to enter into a treaty with the Soviet Union to assure us our military supplies and diplomatic support necessary for the extension of the duration of the war. So these were the critical factors, and I think because these aspects have not been fully studied, there are still questions being asked in our country about the final outcome of each of these wars. Why did we stop in 1947 instead of prolonging the war and bring it to a conclusion?
What I'm going to do now is very quickly switch to General V.K. Singh and tell us, I asked him why military history, and he's given us a wonderfully lucid explanation as to why it's important for higher command, especially if you're a weaker state. You need to be very efficient, very good at it, and so unless you study your weaknesses, you're not would not be able to apply anything. What I'm going to ask you, what has been the state of play? Meaning, you have written a couple of books. Now we know that we do have regimental histories in this country. We do have some kind of writing, but what's the problem with that writing?
Actually, post-independence, that is after 47, there is virtually no military history. When I say no military history, I mean the official military history. There have been large number of accounts written by officers who have served especially in the wars. The official history of the Union is supposed to be written by the history division of the Ministry of Defense. There is an organization which is made responsible. They have written the history of 47, 48, the operations against Kashmir, Pakistan, and that has been printed, published and printed. The wars that fought in 62, 65 and 71 have been written up, not published. And it is a very anomalous situation. It's been put on the website of initially of the Times of India.
Well, I must tell you that you're sitting right next to the person who put them on the website.
I was about to mention it. Way back in 2000, and is now available on bharatrakshak.com also. But it's not available in printed form. And the view of the ministry as well as Army headquarters is that unless it is printed, it is the records, it cannot be declassified. It is still classified. Now the problem arises. One problem has been already pointed out. What is the implication? The more serious problem faced by the defense services is that military history forms an essential ingredient of training of officers. We have a paper on military history in entrance examination to staff college and promotion examination. The officers are still being questioned on World War II campaigns and biographies, sketches of Slim and Rommel and so on. No, this is very sad. We had so many wars, 4 major wars after independence. And the war records are available. It's not that they are not there. The history division has got the war records. That means the war diaries, the operational orders, after action reports. But this, attitude, this paranoia with secrecy, which is all pervasive, is denying research scholars and the public, genuine knowledge of what happened in these wars. Apart from the higher direction, there have been many actions at lower level. What actually happened and how it happened, I mean, in Kargil, you saw that for the first time, people became aware because Barkha Dutt was there on the spot with a camera and a microphone. No, there have been so major wars, much bigger operations before that, and we have got no recorded history. Now, it's a very sad state of affairs. And recently, as you must have known, whatever records were there were some relating to the Mukti Bahini have been destroyed inadvertently. Now, if you remove a brick from some old monument in Delhi, whether it is Khuni Darwaza or the Daulatabad Fort, the ASI will be on you like a ton of bricks. Isn't this part of a heritage? Your war records? And we are just destroying it and nobody is asking a question. Now, this is a very, very sad state. And unfortunately, not much is being done about it. Other than, articles being written in various journals and seminars which are in-house by some academic institutions, professional bodies, etc., like the USI, the IDFC. Outside, as far as the general public is concerned, it is, a non-issue. As it was brought out, if you walk across to the bookshop, you will find a lot of books on other subjects, not on military history. Now, this is a thing which needs to be corrected. And, we have to think of ways and means. And as a first step, the declassification of war records must be done. It's not that it is not mandatory. The Public Records Act has been passed by the government.
I'm going to go to the Public Records Office thereafter. So what I will now ask Squadron Leader Chhina, tell me, you have of course referred to it, and I know that this thing, within the services, A, what is the record management, what do they do with their records? And B, I want to know, after all, you people, and I think General Singh also referred to the fact that they are still teaching Rommel's campaigns and World War II stuff in the institutions. What exactly happens? What happens in NDA? What happens in IMA? What happens in your Air Force institutions? What do they teach? Do they teach some kind? Because I know that in places like West Point and others, you may all be familiar, meaning military history goes back to the time of Alexander. You have Julius Caesar's campaigns in Britain. These are classics. And these are studied even today by military institutions elsewhere. So I want to know what happens here.
Militaries in general, and the Indian military in particular, they tend to be organic institutions. For instance, in India, one of the prime strengths of the Indian Army, which incidentally is perhaps today the second largest army in the world today, is the regimental system. And in a regimental system, its regimental ties are very, very strong. And there is a reason why you have the Ministry of Defense has perhaps the oldest government section that actually deals with the writing of official military histories. And this was done very well up till World War II and maybe some of the campaigns post-independence, the initial ones. But as General V.K. Singh has pointed out, that after that we kind of tend to enter into a black hole. It's actually a huge problem to stick to answer your questions. Where does the record management, etc., where does that figure in? It doesn't exist. It's mandated by law. There is supposed to be a due process by which official records are preserved and they are transferred into the public domain after a certain period of time. There is also, unfortunately, a huge Official Secrets Act which allows the bureaucracies, both military and civil, to circumvent the provisions of the Public Records Act. We have tried repeatedly through the center that I look after to try and impress upon the service headquarters the requirement of ensuring that these records are preserved. you don't have, even if they're not declassified and transferred to the public domain, at least to put a mechanism in place where the records are actually preserved and are not summarily destroyed, which they are being, and they're not being destroyed willfully, they're being destroyed out of ignorance because they're looked upon as functional documents, and once their functionality is over, they're kept for 5 or 10 years, and then when there's a lack of space, somebody just decides to hold a board of officers and destroy these records. And you cannot expect a young captain or a major to understand that, oh, there is a historical significance to this particular file or document. So the main thing over here is that there has to be a proper mechanism put into place. And unfortunately, neither neither academia nor the bureaucracy nor the military seem to have taken enough cognizance of this, in my view, really pressing, urgent requirement. Otherwise, just to give you an example, in 1962, during the Sino-Indian conflict, the Indian Air Force was not used in an offensive role. Now, we are all running around in circles trying to figure out why that happened. There are no records. Air Headquarters has maybe a couple of files dealing with the 62 conflict. Everything else has been consigned to the flames. That shouldn't happen. Things like that shouldn't happen. And particularly in a democracy, there has to be a movement towards greater transparency. Bureaucracies across the world tend to be opaque. Militaries tend to be secretive. In India, the military tends to be border on the paranoid. So we really have to, I think, institute what Anit and I were discussing the other day, and what a number of other countries, militaries in other countries do, and they adopt what they call the best practices in management of records.
We then switch to Anit and ask him what are the best practices.
Thank you so much. Best practices, well, everyone adheres to a law that says within a certain time period they will access all the official documents. Some they will share, some they will not. But who makes that decision is a board of ex-armed forces officers, distinguished academics. I mean, individuals are the experts and the diplomats who actually go through all the official documents and say, this is too much of a secret. This is not a secret. This we can share. But if I could take that as an intro into the bigger point, I think the bigger structural point is simply this. I think the government of India likes to keep its people uninformed. That this forum, this event, it's great, it's fantastic, but frankly, it's a lot like La La Land, which is that Indians and India is fantastic at fiction writing, but non-fiction writing, it's pretty bad. And so I would ask audience members to name me one book on the post-independence Indian military, or diplomacy, or paramilitary, or police that goes into official documents. One book. That goes into official documents that are one interpretation of those official documents. We don't have the sources available for anybody's research. We have the official histories. They are out there, they have been published, but they are interpretations by those authors. None of you, none of me. I am working in IDSA, which is an MOD think tank. I cannot read the primary sources of the official histories. What this basically means is all of us, all Indians, including us scholars, are more or less uninformed, and I think it is a bigger structural issue. We are uninformed about our own official agencies. And the tragedy is visited upon the armed forces themselves. If I, as a junior officer, haven't learned about IPKF operations, because we don't want to face it. I mean, when we talk about best practices, it is simply this, that this whole La La Land concept is done because it is nobody's job to declassify. It's the simplest law of a bureaucracy. If it's nobody's job, the job doesn't get done. And so there is no officer or no body or no organization in the Ministry of Defense, in the MEA, in the MHA, that actually sits down and says, let me sit down and look at the documents. and let me decide that this is too much of a secret, and I can understand there is a need for secrets because we have enemies, external, internal too. I can understand the need for secrets, but somebody has to sit down and say, this is 30 years old.
So the point that I'm trying to get at is that, there is, in every place, I went to the Indian National Archives about 20, 30 years ago. I was looking for documents relating to the US Army in India in the Second World War. I mean, there were 200,000 American servicemen. And the National Archives told me these records haven't been transferred. Meaning, now we're talking of something which has beyond, there's no secrecy required. So what I want to know, I'll ask General VK Singh, that how precisely can we make this declassification procedure? Because you see, what happens is that in our country, given the way things are, there is this buck passing thing. So the guy says, why should I declassify it? Let the next guy do it. And so if there is you take the path of least resistance and nothing gets declassified. So how do you suggest?
You're right. Firstly, like we mentioned, what are best practices? As you know, the United States passed their Freedom of Information Act long back, in 1966, the UK followed it in 2000, and it is being religiously followed. And as a result of that, recently in the last 2 years, they published the official histories of MI5 and of MI6. That is the counterparts of IB and RAW. I can't imagine this being done forever.
I must tell you that the very canny British have stopped at around 1950 in both the history. They don't tell us anything after 1950.
Exactly. So, but at least something has come out, and maybe as the records get older, more will come out. Now, in our case, there seems to be an utter confusion. The Public Records Act says after 30 years, documents will be transferred to archives. The Public Record Rules, which was issued after 2-3 years, makes it 25 years. The RTI Act says 20 years. Now, what do we take? Now, if this is the type of confusion, it is very difficult to follow these instructions. In any case, the Public Records Act mandates that all record-making agencies will carry out a periodic review and send a biannual report to the Director of National Archives. Now, that's not being done. Neither the National Archives is asking for it. It is their job to demand that what happened, we haven't got your report, what documents have you declassified? And the Ministry of Defense, as well as all the 3 armed forces, in fact, they are the biggest culprits, I would say. They are not doing their job. But there's no accountability, nobody to ask them questions why they're not doing it. The first step is to have a strong bit of legislation which makes it mandatory to declassify records. Now, coming to what should be classified and what should be not. You see, secrecy means what? As per the Official Secrets Act, and there are judgments of the High Court and Supreme Court in various cases, secrecy has got no meaning unless it can be shown that this disclosure of this information is going to be detrimental to national security. There are secrets between a husband and a wife or between 2 business partners. No, that is not secret from the national security point of view. The boards of officers which are being held today are being held at unit level by junior officers of the rank of captain and major. I have done it in my service so many times. Nobody ever told me that you should send this to History Division or to archives. So we kept on destroying, and the reason for that is lack of storage space. Simple as that. Now this has to be done by a qualified people at a little higher level. No unit in the Indian Army should be allowed to destroy records. They should be transferred automatically to maybe the History Division or maybe the records, where qualified people, historians or armed forces officers of particular experience and service, they should decide what has got historical value. And whatever has got historical value must be transferred to the archives, if not immediately, after the mandatory period of 20 to 30 years, whatever you decide. After that, it should automatically be available to research scholars. That is the first step which is required. The second thing is this declassification of 62, 65, 71 after the Kargil operations, there was a group of ministers which went into all aspects of security, defense, etc. They have made a specific recommendation on declassification. There was a high-level committee held about maybe 10 years back by Mr. N.L. Vora, General Nambiar and Mr. Prasad from the History Division. They have recommended that all three war history should be published and the war records relating to the three wars be declassified. 10 years have passed. Few years back, the Raksha Mantri was asked in Parliament, what has happened? He says it's still being examined.
I must butt in here and tell you that, since I told you that I'm the one who leaked it, put it on the web, thereafter I was told that there was some discussion that we may like to arrest you. So I said, go ahead. And then I asked the then Minister of Defense, George Fernandez, what do you plan to do? So they said, we are going to set up this committee. Would you like to be a member? I said, you must be joking. I've just done the opposite. But the sadder fact is that there is even greater, this chaos has been compounded by confusion. What has happened is that the government has now come out with a so-called official history of the 1965 war based on that older history which had been put on the web. And the gentleman who has written it, it's been published by the Ministry of Defense officially, but the gentleman who has written it in the foreword says that these are my personal views. So that's the end of the official history, which means that we may not in the near future see an official history. An official history has its own value, and because that's the perspective of the service in question. And we know that there are lots of nuggets. We know that these histories they're not very brilliantly written. The problem is question of original sources, because one is the official part of it. Second part of it is the average scholar. What happened in the university? Meaning the heart of military history really ought to be in our universities, not necessarily dealing with. So I'd like, Chhina, can you this thing that how do we take military history out of the military and put it into the public discourse, public domain? Maybe I'll ask Shekhar first, if you don't mind,
okay.
And then we can you can continue.
Thanks. Well, I think we could take a number of steps. First, have some well-framed questions asked in Parliament. What has such and such a ministry done in order to declassify records of this as required and so on and so forth? If action has not been taken, will the minister give an assurance that it will be done within such and such time? The reason is it's not some great sort of love of secrecy, at least so far as the NA is concerned. In the bureaucracy, the urgent always takes precedence over the important. We are understaffed. People are, it's a day-to-day existence, troubleshooting, immediate problems. So who has the time to look into this? We must find an answer to this, and it's not insuperable. But you need the right pressures. I think a question in Parliament is one such. Second, a systematic use of the Right to Information Act. I know people have done it. It should be more systematic, not simply Defense Ministry, External Affairs, the Cabinet Office, the records of how Cabinet decisions were taken, the Prime Minister's Office. These are essential sources, and I think RTI action could be taken on all these. So I would suggest these are two ways in which.
Thank you, sir. There used to be, talking about secrecy and what constitutes a secret and what doesn't. I remember there used to be a joke during the Soviet times, and somebody says, "Oh, the president is an idiot," and the other chap says, "That's a state secret, so don't disclose it." We tend to carry things to extremes over here. I would. We were. What was a?
Meaning, to spread it from the official part of it and get it into the university.
Yeah.
Because, the big problem is, let's say in JNU, School of International Studies, you read about 65 war, you read about 47, but you only read about the diplomatic consequences of those wars. You never learn what happened in that war.
See, one of the major problems, and I would say, I mean, what's wrong with this picture? The picture over here is that the ambassador is an ex-practitioner of, he's a diplomat. I'm an ex-military officer. He's an ex-military officer. He's an ex-military officer. Where are the academics? Where is civil society? Civil society is not part of the loop. And the reason why civil society is not a part of this loop is primary sources are the lifeblood of a historian. I know that there are lots of very bright professors, there are very bright students, and they occasionally come to me and they say, we would like to study XYZ aspect of the Indian military. And I say, but there are no sources for you to consult. And because there are no sources, then their professors say, well, do something in agriculture or in architecture or whatever. But, so the end result is there is a huge dearth in our knowledge resource. Young people are not studying this important wing of government, this important function, and that's not good in a democracy. It's all of it is left to ex-practitioners of the art, and all of us have our own biases. We tend to close ranks because we look at these matters from a different perspective. So, so absolutely. So the thing over here is that primary source records must be declassified. They have to be transferred to the public domain. As the ambassador suggested, there are ways and means of doing it. I would personally say RTI. I know that RTI is something that can be used, but RTI in itself is its intent is different. It should be there for getting access to ongoing processes, not for say World War II or the INA. I mean, take the Indian National Army. The extent to which we are sensitive about historical matters. The INA papers were classified for nearly 50 years after India became independent. This is the Indian National Army, led by a man who is a demigod in a number of... But the papers that concern that of the government of India were not declassified. They were declassified about 10 odd years ago. There is an official history of the Indian National Army, which still has not seen the light of day. It's no longer classified, but it's somewhere where the average person, if you go there and you ask them for it, they will show it to you. But there's just no way that you're going to get access to that. So
what I'm going to do is I'll ask Anit, tell me, you have had some experience and adventures in dealing with RTI. What happens? How does the RTI fit into all this?
Thank you so much. Actually, I'm a big fan of the RTI. I would advocate all students, professors, academics to start using the RTI. Because without using the RTI, the government will not work. At the same time, the RTI experience I had was kind of flawed, but it gave me really insightful ideas into the way the organization works. So I did an RTI about 2 years ago, and I asked for 6 historical documents. They were dated 1948, 52, 67, 75, 1990.
May I just interrupt? He is in an institution that's a part of the Ministry of Defense. To get access to records of the same ministry, he has to file an RTI application to get access to these historical records. What can be more ridiculous than that?
Yes. The interesting part, and I think it is an idea for, up ahead. I'm still an MOD employee, right? And I have to use an RTI against the MOD. But I'd asked for these 6 things. I got about 32, an emails back saying we are not able to locate it, which gave me the first insight is they don't know where the documents are kept. 2 years later, after the whole information, in fact, I appealed against it. 2 years later, the MOD claimed that they cannot find 5 of the 6 documents. And one of them is dated 1989, and it's a very critical report. The MOD is basically saying that those documents that they could not declassify because it was important to them cannot be traced.
Essentially, they're lying.
Basically, A, they're lying, B, they don't know where they are, or C, they've been destroyed. But this is a scandal, and they gave me that letter, and I looked at it and I was like, wow, are you seriously giving me this answer? Are you serious? I mean, you actually are saying you cannot find these documents? I mean, this ought to be a front page story, and it shouldn't be about the date of birth of a certain chief. I think this is, I think, a big question to be asked of the MOD, and the Armed Forces Headquarters. But I hence say that at this point of time, the best thing that all of us can do is file n number of RTIs, as many RTIs. It just costs 10 rupees. Flood them with RTIs. Ask for whatever documents you want, because that's the only way they will come back with an answer saying we will start to do it now. Otherwise, if you sit on our haunches, if you sit in Jaipur, if you start to argue about it, nothing gets done. This government, our government, needs a push. And the only way it can be pushed is if the people actually push
Anit,
for it.
We've spoken about the RTI. Let's speak about that other big bugbear, the Official Secrets Act. Singh?
Yeah.
Because you have had some adventures with that.
Sorry. And like him, I had to file about 60 odd RTIs dealing with Official Secrets Act. And equally interesting. First of all, I asked this act was passed in 1923. And I did a lot of research in the National Archives. I could find how the act was, conceived, etc., and passed. I couldn't find the official gazette. The last document I found was the Viceroy sending a copy to the Secretary of State. But no gazette was published, and I was told that no gazette in existence. I filed an RTI with the Home Ministry, Law Ministry. They transferred it to Archives. Archives has given me a letter that the official gazette is not held. I said, how can there be a law in force when there is no official gazette? But do you know, a lawyer's junior gave me a copy of this official gazette. When I went and showed it to the archives, they had red faces. Then they dug it out from somewhere. I don't know whether they deliberately didn't.
I've been told at the time when this whole Kashmir issue was blowing up, I was told by a very senior American official in Washington, D.C., that India has lost its copy of the Instrument of Accession.
Yes.
I don't know how true this is.
That is another
I haven't
story.
tried to explore.
That is another story. Nobody knows where that Instrument of Accession with Maharaja Hari Singh signed. It was in some cupboard. I don't know, maybe the PMO or somewhere. It's not necessary. Anyway, now coming back to this, Official Secrets Act. If you use the RTI, there is a very powerful section in the RTI. Apart from the, organizations which are exempted, like the intelligence agencies and so and so. And, fortunately the armed forces are not exempted. I don't know why. Anyway, there is a section 8, under which any information can be denied if it hurts the security of the state.
All of us are finally just stretching boundaries to see, the boundaries keep shifting. For me, the convent was not, because I wasn't looking to break a lot of rules really. But yes, after I got out of the convent, I was looking to break a few rules. And along the way, you find that there are so many rules to break.
Nisha, I wanted that कि तुम अपना introduction दो कि वो pink panty campaign तुमने चलाया था तो लोगों को पता चले.
Please do.
Please do it. Hello. We want your experiences too.
Yeah, this is my secret second identity, which I now have firmly hidden. A few years ago, when I work for Tehelka, I work in Delhi, and my hometown is Bangalore, so I have a lot of really deep attachments and feelings to Karnataka. So a few years ago, there was this attack. I don't know whether all of you know or remember, but there was this group called the Sri Ram Sene, which attacked a few girls who were in a pub in the afternoon. It was a very publicized encounter. It was meant to gain a certain kind of power. It was not like a deep moral statement about women. I feel like it was a very cynical move. And so that happened. A few weeks later, they announced that they were going to ban Valentine's Day. Anybody who's lived in India in the last 10 years, you know that every Valentine's Day, somebody or the other wants to ban it. It's very entertaining. Okay, and so at first, it was not something I really thought about, because frankly, this sort of thing seems to happen so frequently in India. After a point, you become numb and unbothered, right? But I think perhaps because it's Karnataka, I really felt something. So I started something on Facebook. I started something called the Pink Chadi campaign. It was a joke, really. It's at 2 o'clock in the morning. You should not be online. At 2 o'clock in the morning, if you're online, you shouldn't start anything. It's a bad idea. Okay, so not good. Don't do it. So anyway, so
Can we bypass it? What's the way forward? So I want to ask you, Shekhar, that you are now working on a history of the 1971 war or that period. I believe that the Ministry of External Affairs has indeed moved much further than the MOD. The Ministry of External Affairs has done something. Can you just tell us about what that was?
Yeah, they've moved forward, quite considerably. Till a few years ago, the records of the Ministry of External Affairs were dumped in the basement. It was removed, it had to be removed from there because it was regarded as a fire hazard. But to its great credit, it has to be said that the Ministry of External Affairs saw in this an opportunity to systematize its archives. And now they've been moved. It's a perfectly modern archive. They've all been digitized, catalogued, and stored in a modern sort of air-conditioned surrounding.
Takes the decision on declassification.
Now, this is I'm coming to that. The problem with declassification is still that it requires the signature of a joint secretary on any file. And the poor devils simply don't have the time to do this. It's not anything else. I'm told that heroic efforts were made by some individual officers, and a batch of files has gone recently to the archives. In fact, there were a few stories in the Times of India, based on these. But I think what could be done, even if the archives are not yet declassified, a genuine scholar, if he can apply for permission to the ministry, and on a case-by-case basis, the ministry would take a decision on whether to do this or not. This is what I'm advised. I think you could try that, but
it isn't working because they have that official position. I know of scholars who are genuine, who have applied for permission. It hasn't worked. So
at least in the MEA system, the Joint Secretary, who is the Territorial Joint Secretary, is the empowered officer. So
yes.
he is able. In the army, I think in the military, I think the problem is who's going to be empowered to declassify. I don't think anyone wants to take that chance. But what I'm going to do now is to open up we have 15 minutes, and I'm going to open up the discussion to the floor. And so there's a mic there. Please identify yourself and.
Good morning, everyone. I just have something to share and ask. When I was in school, my history book ended with the last chapter, 1947 independence, and the epilogue used to be 1950, the journey from independence to being republic. And even today, after around 5 years, CBSE, or for that matter, any regional board, has not been moved forward from that. History books ends on 1950 being republic. And I am sure that no one in the new generation 10 years from now would ever even know about the unsung heroes, the defense officers who have lost their lives in the wars thereafter. So I think that the records of Indian military history are not just important to NDA or to, for that matter, any military academy, but also to the schools from where our future defense officers will come from. So I think something should be done in that regard.
Okay, thank you. Just it is a fact when Vice Admiral K.K. Nair, he brought out a book on every person who had died in the country's wars. Magnificent piece of work. But he had a huge problem. We do not have a central place in the Ministry of Defense or in the Army or in the Navy or in the Air Force where you can get the entire list. he had to go unit by unit and pick up that.
We-
Now, right there, sir.
Sorry. I retired as Director General Border Security Force, and also I worked as Internal Security Secretary in Government of India. I can tell you what actually happens. People, as he rightly said, they are busy in doing day-to-day work so much, they do not have time for these important things. But I think solution was suggested after Kargil committee gave its recommendations, especially as about army. I think the defense university should have been set up, because universities are the places where actually which have to be repository of knowledge. And same thing, I think when I visited New York, I found there is a police university. After every 10 years, New York Police Department gives all its records to that university, where research scholars and retired army or police officers or serving police officers, they go and prepare books, what went wrong, what needs to be done in future. I think we need to have some institutions like this. And also I think we have to use RTI till that thing happens. And I don't know why Defense University has not come to today. And similarly, National Police University, none other than the Prime Minister of India, said in 2008 it should be set up expeditiously. But nothing of that sort has been done till today. Thank you very much.
May I? There is a move to set up a National Defense University, NDU, which should come up at some point in time. The other point which you mentioned about, we've actually made attempts. We understand. I mean, we've all been part of the system, and you absolutely understand that while they have better things to do than look at history. There are lots of things that are happening in real time. The center that I look after, which is set up essentially by the armed forces to look at military history, we have put forward presentations to the Chief of Integrated Defense Staff twice, saying that we understand that you don't have the time to do that, but we can do this for you. It was like, the Titanic, they just sank like a stone, and they never heard back from them. So there has to be an awareness, and more than that awareness, there has to be, as Anit pointed out, a pressure on them at some level that there is a problem and let's do something to resolve it. But until and unless that pressure comes,
Sorry.
I represent an organization called India Photo Archive Foundation, and what we are interested in is visual histories. We met, and a few years back I discovered General U.C. Dubey's album of Razmak, an area which is in Taliban control now. And also a few years back we discovered a whole lot of images of 1965 Haji Pir Pass. And what happened after that was all hell broke loose. Whole lot of military intelligence officers started coming and visiting me and said, look, Haji Pir was returned back to Pakistan, and we have these rare visuals and lots of them of what happened there. And similarly of late we've discovered a lot of albums from 1901, 1902, Scottish regiments which were here, sappers from 1930, but every time one comes out with some information, invariably a whole lot of army intelligence officers contact us. We won't have access to all these.
Can Admiral Shekhawat, the former chief of the naval staff, is here with us, and I'd request him to give us right here.
Well, thank you, Manoj. I was about to raise my hand, but you preempted me. There's been a lot of reference to how good the records were before 1947 and how thereafter we don't have any available. I think we must understand and imagine the situation that existed at that time. There was a partition going on. There were riots going on. There was total disruption across the entire subcontinent. Huge volumes of people were moving from other. And imagine the preoccupations of the political class and the civil services, the police and the military too, to a lesser extent. The British had a well-established system of record keeping, developed over several world wars, colonial wars, and in my own personal opinion, East India Company played a role in the creation of that system, because that was a commercial organization which sent out ships to trade, and they wanted records and accounts of how the money was spent, what was bought, and those records were kept, and it was a more leisurely time as well. So there was a huge disruption that took place. Secondly, as I know the gentleman, but for a moment, yes. So, as he pointed out, there is such an excess of paperwork being generated in the government, every department of government, and if you ask me, a lot of avoidable paperwork. So people simply do not have the time to attend to anything beyond the day-to-day work that they're doing. We did not get round to creating dedicated organizations with specialists whose sole job would be to record history. Again, due to the disruption at the beginning itself and the poor governance, which every day it's in the newspapers, the media, which has evolved and persisted over all that time. So unless some of these aspects are tackled, we are not going to be able to address this problem. What do we need to do about it? Fortunately, we have developed some good institutions, National Defense College, war colleges, on all three services, and to my mind, that is where the center for the recording of official history should take place. I have attended the U.S. Naval War College. It's a huge facility with academics of top quality who are taken there on tenure basis or contract basis. And there is an interchange of ideas, there's a cross flow of people between all the disciplines of government. And so you will find that, take the military. It works closely with the political establishment, and they are party to all the events as they take place, whether in the diplomatic sphere, military sphere, commercial sphere, the topmost political, foreign policy, anything like that. So unless our system itself evolves and improves, and there is more time for, just to digress for a moment, there is often a question of why don't we have a Chief of Defence Staff? I once asked a former Prime Minister a certain question. I said, sir, how much time can you devote to your job? There was a background to that question. He looked up at me, he was sitting, I was standing. He said, not even 20%. I didn't ask him anything more. I know what he meant. And he knew what I meant. There are political fires raging all over the country, deliberately lit in order to divert attention. Until the Prime Minister of this country has enough time to devote to the real issues of concern like foreign policy, economic policy, strategic issues, he doesn't have that time. So, you don't have a Chief of Defence Staff, and you're not going to have one until the Prime Minister of the country is freed from the day-to-day concern, minute-to-minute concern. The same Prime Minister, I happened to be sitting across the table with him at a larger meeting. Somebody came and handed a piece of note to him. And he says, have a heart, how can I leave for Tripura at 3 o'clock in the morning? Now, what would it be that would require a Prime Minister to go at 3 o'clock in the morning to Tripura that morning? Surely that should not be. Obama doesn't rush off to California, or the British Prime Minister.
So we are running clear out of time, because what I need to do is to give our panelists just 1 minute each, and to make a comment. So I'll start with Anit.
Thanks. To that girl over there, I completely agree with her about the distance between the Indian Armed Forces and the Indian people. This is the distance that we have created. Because if you go around, let's say Paris, London, US, anywhere, two things that strike you. They have national war museums where the people connect. with the armed forces. In Delhi, you have some people, Chaudhary, Charan Lal, Sanjay Gandhi, Ambedkar, they're all great leaders, fine. There's not one national war museum. The one that we have, the Amar, it was built by the British to honor their war dead. There is a distance between Indian people and Indian society, so I completely agree at this point that unless we free it up, and you kind of, I mean, the big elephant in the room, the book that cannot be named, the author who could not come. You got to have to think about it yourself. Does India have the confidence to deal with our own history if we can't deal with fiction? And the people, all of us have to be aware about this, because you can tell a lot about the people by the heroes that they have. The heroes that we have are cricketers, film stars, rich industrialists. Who are our military heroes?
Let's move.
And I think,
Okay. Yeah, I'd just like to add that question asked by the young lady is absolutely on the dot. It is not only for us, military history is important for you. You must know how our soldiers have fought, how our soldiers have died. And as Anit brought out, there are two things, a national war memorial and a war museum. Both are lacking. The government has not been able to provide space. I mean, a little piece of land. In fact, right opposite the National Archives was an Air Force mess, and they were just asked to shift somewhere. Ideal place for a war museum. It was made the Indira Gandhi Center for Arts. It is non-functional even today.
Squadron Leader Chhina.
Well, all I'll say is, sir, that there is a pressing need for rationalizing these issues, and until and unless there is a pressure on the establishment, both from civil society as well as academics and government professionals, retired people like us, nothing is going to happen. But if we don't do that, we're going to lose a very, very vital aspect of our history, and this nation will be poorer for it. That's all.
Shekhar.
Thank you. I'll take just 5 seconds, and this is an appeal. Please ask your Member of Parliament, if you know him, to raise a pointed question about declassification of archives, and press him to obtain an assurance from the Minister that the needful will be done. Thank you.
I have one holdover question, and
yes,
have
thank
to be
you.
really quick.
Actually, I have 2 questions. My name is Shail Sharma. I write a blog on military affairs. I won't talk about what has been going on lately. I don't think that's
But
really the
I'm
purpose.
not going to give you, the point is there's going to be no response. So
Yeah, so there are 2 questions essentially. One is military and the other is civil. I'd like to address the military question to Squadron Leader Chhina and the civil to Anit here. The military question is, you talked about individual units. My father was from the Brigade of the Guards. If I want to get some history on him, if I go to the Indian Army website, I can speak to regimental sources. Why is there this pall of secrecy? And the civil question, and that relates to what you said about why there are no academics in this whole sort of sphere. You have retired officers, you have, of course, defense journalists, but is there a university, people who are interested in this field? People are bound by service regulations, they're bound by, if you're from the army, it's very hard for you to write on anything. There is this thing on your head. Someone like me who's genuinely interested, which university do I go to?
Okay, well, I'm not going to, we're not going to have that answered right now, because what we'll do is that Mr. Sharma can get his response after this thing. I'm going to, this session is going to conclude now. I'd like to thank my panelists, as well as the audience. As I said, I was surprised that so many of you came. So give everyone a good hand. Thank you.